Okay, students, now that we have finished Unit 1, we've come to an appreciation about um, some kind of understanding of the immigrant experience in the United States. We've taken a look at the importance of race, uh, taken a look at understanding policy, and something about nativism. So now, as we know, and as if you look around, really the world's nations have their populations existing as American citizens in the United States today. And their respective histories intermingle in the streets of all the major cities of the United States. So in this course, so far in Unit 1, we've discussed the generalized history of immigration. Um, and when we take a look at Los Angeles, I mean, just take a look around you. All of the peoples of the world are here in Los Angeles. The European Russian, the African, the Asian Indian, the Pacific Islanders, Middle Easterners, native peoples of the Western Hemisphere. We are all part of a place called El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles. And so when we take a look at immigration, the Mexican experience in the United States is very important to understand the significance of immigration. The Mexican experience in the United States has a diverse and varied history that challenges us to seriously understand and come to terms with, especially with regards to the politics surrounding the creation of an immigration policy. And this policy affects every Mexican's existence as a human being today, regardless of when you were born in the United States. When we talk about the Mexican experience, first and foremost, we must root that discussion in native thought practices and beliefs. The foundation of the Mexican existence is native traditions. Traditions that are rooted in the land and the linguistic expressions found today in the area known as the United States Southwest and northern Mexico. It is in the spirit of the Mexican existence today to recreate native peoples' expressive mobility. So, since time immemorial, the Mexica people have been moving back and forth on this continent, occupying every niche, sharing seeds, material resources, and stories that emanated from the valleys of what was known as the center of the universe. Places that were called Teotihuacan, Monte Alban, Chichen Itza, and Tenochtitlan. And there are stories of people finding their way up to the Great Lakes region via the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers, of people finding their way up to Montana and Canada via what eventually will become the Santa Fe, Chihuahua, Zacatecas thoroughfare, or the Camino Real, of Raza finding their way up the Pacific coastline via the deserts of Sonora and Sinaloa and Baja California, all along the coast of California, another Camino Real. Now, I'm going to share with you a film clip from a documentary entitled Chaco Canyon. And in this film clip, we're going to understand the significance of migration as the key experience in the creation of monumental architecture, in the creation of civilizations of the Southwest via Mexico. One of the things about native peoples of the Southwest, they have oral traditions honoring the sacred peoples from below, honoring the people who came from what was known as Mesoamerica, Middle America, Central America, Mexico America. Native peoples of the Southwest have these oral traditions that honor the sacred peoples from below who came and taught them sophisticated agricultural techniques. We're going to visit a documentary so we can come to know the people from the center of the universe and how they came into the Southwest, so that we can recognize that the Mexican experience is rooted in native thought practices and beliefs, that Mexicans have been moving back and forth along this border since time immemorial.
we began our migrations, we came up into this world from the world below. The Creator telling the people that there are certain places that you're to live and giving them signs of recognition to where these sites are to be found. The migrations began over probably a period of centuries, always looking for that place that was to be the center of our world.
In this land of extremes, the relentless sun soars temperatures to 110 degrees, parching the earth and quieting all life. 6 months later, frigid winds drop temperatures well below zero, in a canyon offering little shelter. And yet here, ancient people chose to construct the center of their world. Buildings of over 700 rooms, originally reaching 4 stories high. And on top of this tower of stone, they marked, with a dagger of light, their knowledge of the sky, a knowledge they would use to guide their construction of a center of cosmology, taking 250 years to complete. The place is a remote canyon in the American Southwest called Chaco. 1,000 years ago, the heart of an ancient Pueblo Indian civilization. These grand buildings have posed a profound mystery for over 100 years of archaeological studies. Why were they built here in this unforgiving place? What was the purpose of their dark, enclosed rooms? And of an arrow-straight road to the north? And why, after building these majestic structures, did people deliberately seal them and leave? Recent discoveries reveal an intricate astronomical system here. Clues to Chaco have been held over the centuries in these walls, and in the oral histories carried by the descendant people, the Pueblo Indians of today.
In our history, they talk of things that occurred a long time ago, of people who had enormous amount of power, spiritual power and power over people. I think those types of people lived here in Chaco.
It's a mystery what attracted people to this spare land. In 850 AD, the arid soil in Chaco Canyon supported only small clusters of subsistence farmers. Traces of their modest earth-sheltered dwellings have all but disappeared, leaving no hint of what was to come. Over the next 2.5 centuries, 10 massive buildings were constructed here, built 4 to 5 stories high and containing 3,000 rooms. At the center, the structure known as Pueblo Bonito grew to cover 3 acres, a space that suggests the grandeur of one of the great public buildings of the world. At its completion, Pueblo Bonito was the size of the Roman Colosseum. 12 generations of people devoted themselves to building these elaborate structures under nearly impossible conditions. Food would not grow easily in the canyon, and water was scarce. Building materials had to be transported from distant sites. To craft their exquisite walls, The Chacoan masons cut and hauled thousands of tons of sandstone from the mesa tops above. To raise their buildings to 4 stories, they obtained massive timbers from distant mountains. They transported 220,000 timbers by foot across 50 to 70 miles into the canyon. And all this in a place so barren, it's thought that much of the food to support the thousands of builders had to be imported. The Chacoans crafted elegant pottery and ceremonial objects of inlaid turquoise. The raw materials for these efforts were also brought from distant sites. In these challenging conditions, the Chacoan culture flourished across a vast region. They built communities and roads throughout 95,000 square miles of the American Southwest. They traded with cultures 2,000 to 3,000 miles to the south. Objects of Mesoamerican origin, including parrots and plumed serpents, were found in the buildings of Chaco. To most archaeologists, the impractical choice of building here has been explained by the theory that it was a trade center, collecting and redistributing goods from a 35,000 square mile area. Over 200 miles of ancient well-engineered roads connected with the Chaco buildings. A theoretical picture was drawn of Chaco, of roads busy with traders and a thriving populace of workers and families, filling the 3,000 rooms of the large buildings with as many as 10,000 people.
Okay, students, that is a fascinating documentary called The Mystery of Chaco Canyon. And for those of you who are interested, again, you need to get at least 120 points minimum in the units to pass the class. Those of you who are interested in watching this documentary in its full, just let me know and I will send you the link, and then you can write a review on it for extra credit. Again, based on the fact that you get 120 points minimum in each of the units. So anyway, what we need to appreciate and what this film clip emphasizes is that prior to the arrival of Columbus, the Western Hemisphere was interconnected. Not only was Chaco Canyon connected to central Mexico, Chaco Canyon was also connected to civilizations that arose along the Mississippi River and the Ohio. Another fascinating experience. But it was central Mexico that was the place, Mesoamerica, Middle America, from central Mexico down to Guatemala, down to Nicaragua. That place, that area was the place that funneled people north to Canada and funneled people south to the Andes mountain ranges. So today, the reason why we can find Mexicans in Florida, in New York, in Canada, in Alaska, in Nebraska, as well as Australia and Brazil and Argentina and Chile, is that they are following ancient patterns of migration. And that's what this film shares with you, migration. But migration is tied to spirituality and connection to the land. So as far as the Mexican identity is concerned, how did the Mexican identity originate? Well, first let's understand that the word Mexican is of Nahuatl origin. In other words, Nahuatl, the language that the people were speaking in central Mexico. Mexican comes from the word mexica. Take the N off the Mexican and you have mexica. Mexica means in Nahuatl to be human. We are human beings. Mexica refers to our humanity. This term originated in a place that came to be identified as the center of the universe. And that place is Tenochtitlan. So we're going to take a look at the origins of Tenochtitlan from a fascinating documentary series that was hosted by Peter Weller and the History Channel, and it's entitled Engineering an Empire, the Aztecs. So let's take a look at this particular documentary clip.
The island the Aztecs were banished to after their disastrous sacrifice of the princess was in Lake Texcoco, the largest of 5 interconnected lakes covering a valley about 40 by 70 miles. Today, this once vast and open valley is teeming with what is modern-day Mexico City, one of the largest cities in the world. But 700 years ago, the island was so swampy, no one had laid claim to it. Now, as they gazed on the lake, the Aztec leader Tenoch announced to his followers that he had seen an eagle perched on a cactus in the middle of the lake, a sign from the gods that they had found their new home. They would name their city Tenochtitlan. Life is tough for the Aztecs in the early days of Tenochtitlan, but they have a vision of a powerful city modeled on an ancient and legendary city just 25 miles away. They called this city Teotihuacan, or City of the Gods.
We know very little about Teotihuacan because all we have is the archaeological remains. We don't have any writing, we don't have any documentation that really fleshes out what went on at this big city.
It was in ruins even in Aztec times, but they believed it to be the stomping grounds of the gods and the literal birthplace of the sun itself. The place the Aztecs most revered in Teotihuacan was a pyramid that rose above the tree line. It was called the Pyramid of the Sun. The massive sun pyramid contains 1 million cubic yards of earth and stone, with a base roughly the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. The Aztecs believed Teotihuacan was laid out in the image of the cosmos, created by their gods. Now it was this image they would attempt to replicate in the construction of their new city, Tenochtitlan. Taking on the challenge would be an Aztec leader named Acamapichtli. In 1376, he embarked on an ambitious plan to engineer an advanced city at Tenochtitlan. But there was a problem.
The swampy islands that they took over needed a lot of work. When they started to build anything, it would begin to subside.
There was simply no foundation on which to build. The Aztec solution would revolutionize the architecture of the Americas. They began by anchoring their buildings deep in the ground using a system of pilings made from wood. Workers cut stakes into 30-foot lengths, 3 to 4 inches wide. These were driven into the soft ground to make a foundation. The pilings were often surrounded with volcanic stone to add strength. Masons and bricklayers could then build walls on top of this base with confidence.
They have found wooden pylons to hold the foundations of the pyramids. The fact that it didn't sink or the fact that it didn't just topple, I think that's a major feat of engineering.
Tenochtitlan was an island city, but the lakes surrounding it were very shallow, sometimes only 7 feet deep. The whole thing looked like a giant metroplex floating on a pond. Originally, the only way to get from this floating city to the mainland was by boat. But the Aztecs eventually devised a series of causeways, sometimes 45 feet wide, that would connect their floating city to the mainland provinces. The causeway was supported by strong wooden pilings, the same pilings that supported their temples and other buildings. Thousands of these pilings had to be driven deep into the lake bed, and this presented a logistical challenge that could only be met by a strong, skilled labor force and the best of Mesoamerica's engineers.
To build a causeway, 2 lines of stakes were laid out. Then the space between them was filled with stones and earth until it reached several feet above the water level. This allowed the road to support enormous weight.
These causeways were built very straight, they were very wide, with bridges that would open up that connected the city to the north, to the west, and to the south.
The roads enabled the Aztecs to transport larger, heavier materials for building. But this presented a new challenge.
There were no beasts of burden in Mesoamerica, so everything had to be done with humans. No carts, no wheel.
Small loads would be carried on the back with a rope hung from the forehead. Large items like stone blocks or sculptures for a temple would be dragged by huge numbers of men pulling ropes, possibly using logs as rollers. Legend has it one stone bound for a temple required a force of 50,000 men to drag it from the mountains on the mainland across the causeway and into the city. The causeways would also present the Aztecs with a new way to get fresh water to Tenochtitlan. In the past, the Aztecs had transported water in canoes from the shore. But a huge boom in the city's population meant they needed a higher-tech solution to keep up with demand.
They wanted to use water from the springs on the mainland, and so they wanted to build an aqueduct.
But the
Okay, students, what a fascinating experience, huh? Especially the way that Peter Weller and the History Channel are presenting the Mexica Empire. Now, the Mexica called themselves Mexica. It was the Spanish that will call them Aztecs, and that's why we call them Aztecs today, simply because the Spanish came in to conquer, and when a conquering nation comes in, they change the history of people, so they decided to call them Aztecs based on a place where they had originally come from, which was Aztlan. But anyway, the Mexica, if you remember the film clip from Chaco Canyon, the previous film clip that I shared with you, there was a Pueblo historian that talked about how their people came up into this world from the world below. Well, that world below was Teotihuacan. And the people from Teotihuacan provided the foundations from which to initiate pilgrimages to the north. And it is from Teotihuacan that Mesoamerican traditions spread north and south. And this is whom as the film refers to, Aztecs, that they tried to replicate Teotihuacan. So let's appreciate one of the most valuable skills that Mexicans have shared with the United States. Now think about it. Throughout the history of the United States, Mexicans have been the agricultural workers. And it is their agricultural expertise that forms part of the United States history. I mean, the United States relies on Mexican farm workers. Today, the United States cannot survive without Mexican farm workers. So understand something here about migration and immigration and the formation and control of labor forces. Again, always remember the vocabulary that I introduced you to and see how it applies continuously throughout the presentations. Now, the United States cannot survive without Mexican farm workers, and believe me, they are everywhere you find a corporate farm. California needs Mexican farm workers. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and now even Florida and the Carolinas. And can you believe also New Jersey? That is why you can find Mexicans in every state of the Union. So we're going to revisit the documentary hosted by Peter Weller to find out the origins of this rich Mexican tradition.
That is the exact moment of the beginning of the empire, and the Aztecs became the leaders of the Valley of Mexico.
After conquering the Valley of Mexico, the Aztecs could now turn their attention to bringing clean water to their growing city. Remarkably, the Aztecs would independently design and build something that only a few world empires would master: the aqueduct. The aqueduct actually had two channels, each about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide. One would be cleaned and maintained, while the other was being used so the water flow was never interrupted. The twin-tube aqueduct ran for 3 miles from the mainland to the center of the island city. In town, water streamed into public fountains and reservoirs, and was distributed to the public in large clay jars or by canoe.
In comparison to the Europeans, the Aztec were a very clean people. We know that the Aztec emperor bathed twice a day. So in terms of hygiene, the Aztec people was much more advanced than the Europeans.
While the Aztec nobles were bathing in luxury, at this time in Europe, plague caused by unsanitary conditions was killing millions. King Nezahualcoyotl's own bath was one of the most unique in the Americas. It was fed by a sophisticated aqueduct system that also brought running water to his palace grounds.
Behind me is the hill of Tenochtitlan. And on this hill, Nezahualcoyotl built a fantastic pleasure palace. And around this palace, a virtual botanical garden filled with all of the exotic flowers of Mesoamerica. Nezahualcoyotl brought water from the Sierra Nevada mountains all the way down to here, into this hill, to his palace, just to water his plants.
To install an aqueduct there, Nezahualcoyotl had to fill a huge gorge between Tenochtitlan and the next hill. As the water arrived at the first hill, it gathered in small pools built to control the speed of the flow before it reached the aqueduct. After crossing the aqueduct, the water ran in a circuit around Tenochtitlan Hill, spilling off over the sides in rock-cut waterfalls to water the gardens. It ended up in a nearly perfectly round rock-cut pool called the King's Bath.
And from here, he could look upon his domain of Texcoco, and he could look down at the botanical gardens that he was watering with his fantastic aqueducts. It is indeed a bath fit for a king.
By the mid-15th century, with their empire on the rise, it was time for the Aztecs to choose a sovereign leader. He was called Moctezuma, and he would be the first of two emperors with this now famous name. Moctezuma's first order of business was to extend the empire's borders. The Aztecs captured city-states southward to the valley of Oaxaca, westward to the Pacific, and east toward the Gulf of Mexico. By 1449, the empire contained as many as 15 million people. In the short span of 100 years, the Aztecs accomplished the impossible. They had toppled the Mesoamerican world order. But while the Aztecs dominated militarily, their island city was vulnerable to a different kind of enemy. Like New Orleans, Tenochtitlan was constantly doing battle with water. And one of Moctezuma's first projects was to protect his city from the deluge of water surrounding it.
This is what is left of Lake Xochimilco, in the southern part of Mexico City, in Aztec times, the city of Tenochtitlan. This lake, like the other four lakes that surrounded the city, were spring-fed. Thus, there were no rivers or streams into which it could drain. And if it rained hard enough, the water would rise up and sweep over the land and into the city itself. And this is exactly what happened in the mid-1400s when a flood of catastrophic proportions swept into Tenochtitlan. The city and the empire it commanded were almost completely destroyed, and the Aztec civilization had to once again rely upon the genius of its engineers, and one engineer in particular.
Moctezuma enlisted the help of his old ally Nezahualcoyotl to protect the city he was rebuilding from the lake. Nezahualcoyotl would design a solution that would make him the greatest engineer on the continent. His plan was to create a safe zone around the city with a huge dike that would protect Tenochtitlan and its inhabitants. It was designed to be larger than any earthwork anywhere in the Americas at the time, running for 10 miles just east of the city from the southern edge of the lake across to the north. The walls were a wickerwork construction made of sticks, reeds, stone, and earth. Since the lake was shallow, the dike was only about 12 feet in height, but some 27 feet wide. Nezahualcoyotl fitted the dike with sluice gates, most likely wooden doors that would be raised or lowered to control the water level behind it. The dike also served another purpose. It protected their water supply.
It was important to build some sort of protective mechanism to keep salt water out of the freshwater western part of the lake.
An army marches on its stomach, so said Napoleon. Now, an ample food supply for civilians is a no-brainer in the critical development of any civilization. But the Aztecs perfected a unique method not only to provide a substantial food supply for its civilian populace, but to fuel the military expansion of its empire.
This revolutionary engineering was called chinampas, a system that allowed them to literally create new land to farm and to live on.
If you're going to have a city of any size, you have to provide room for them. And so what they did was build up these chinampas in the lake bed.
Basically, a chinampa is an artificial island built in the lake.
They looked like narrow football fields, about 300 feet long by about 30 feet wide. A chinampa was built by weaving a web of sticks floating in the water and piling reeds on top of them. Mud was then scraped from the lake bottom and piled atop the reeds to form the chinampa. It took 4 to 6 men 8 days to build the average chinampa. They were connected to the city by massive navigational canals that would take thousands of men months to build.
A chinampa like this one could produce up to 7 crops a year, whereas a farm on the mainland could yield 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 at the most. As a crop was ready to harvest on a chinampa, seedlings from another would be sprouting out of mud that would be spread on a boat adjacent to the chinampa. Then when the seedlings were ready, they'd be transported to the chinampa, and this cycle would be repeated over and over and over again on hundreds and then thousands of chinampas. Now, it was this technology that transformed Tenochtitlan from just another tribal town in the 14th century to a dominant and thriving city-state.
Okay, so as that documentary shares with you, it is the Chinampa system that allows everyone to have a balanced diet of corn, beans, squash, and chile. So I want to emphasize here that this is the basis of the Mexican experience. Wherever you find a Mexican family, especially those who really understand their Mexica roots, you will see that they have a garden where they are growing their corn, beans, squash, and chile, as well as other sacred herbs that native peoples have always used, such as hierbabuena and manzanilla, just to name 2. So again, the Mexican experience in the United States has a diverse and varied history that challenges us to seriously understand and come to terms with. So when we talk about the Mexican experience, first and foremost, we must root that discussion in native thought, practices, and beliefs. So the foundation of the Mexican existence is native traditions. These are traditions that are rooted in the land and the linguistic expressions that are found today in the area known as the United States Southwest and northern Mexico. So it is in the spirit of the Mexican existence today to recreate native peoples' expressive mobility. So the major point here to understand is that there were no borders back then, and peoples were moving back and forth across this great continent. Okay, this ends part 1. Let's go to part 2. Thank you.